The night of my wedding should have felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. Yet even as the music faded and the guests disappeared into the dark, I felt a weight I couldn't name pressing against my chest. My dress smelled faintly of roses. My shoes pinched, and the gold band around my finger gleamed under the hotel lamp. I kept telling myself this was happiness, that the knot in my stomach was simply nerves. Daniel, my new husband, stood at the window, jacket off, tie loose, staring out at the city lights as if they belonged to him. I watched the way his shoulders squared, how his jaw tightened, and something in his silence unnerved me. Still, when he turned, his smile was warm enough to chase the thought away. For a moment, he raised a glass of champagne and said softly, "To forever." I lifted mine, though my hand trembled. "To us." The clink of crystal echoed in the small room, louder than it should have been. He studied me as though memorizing every movement, every breath, and though part of me thrilled at the intensity, another part whispered that being seen so closely could be dangerous. When he kissed me, the taste of champagne lingered, but so did his grip, too firm, almost possessive. I laughed nervously, brushing it off, convincing myself that passion can look like hunger, that love can feel like being claimed. The night blurred with candlelight and whispered promises, but just before I fell asleep, I caught him staring. Not with tenderness, not with joy, but with something harder, colder. His eyes lingered on me as if testing the weight of ownership. I closed my eyes, praying it was exhaustion, not omen. The room was quiet, except for his steady breathing beside. Still, that glance rooted in my mind, haunting the edges of sleep. I told myself tomorrow would be brighter. Tomorrow would be normal. But even then, on the very first night of my marriage, a single thought gnawed its way into my heart. Had I married a man I didn't truly know? Morning light spilled across the balcony of our seaside hotel, painting everything gold. I told myself this was the picture of bliss. Waves crashing below, palm trees swaying in the salt air, and Daniel seated across from me, already scanning the breakfast menu as if the day belonged to him. "Don't order that," he said when I glanced at the pancakes. "It's too heavy. You'll feel sluggish all day. Get the fruit plate instead." His tone was calm, but final. I smiled politely, agreeing, though inside I wondered why my choice mattered. I reminded myself, newlyweds adjust, compromise, learn each other's rhythms. That was normal, wasn't it? The days followed a pattern. He decided when we ate, where we walked, how long we stayed by the beach. When I suggested visiting the old town, his lips curled into a thin smile. "Not today. You wouldn't like it there anyway. Trust me." It wasn't the words, but the way he cut them short, dismissing me with certainty that left me quiet. I convinced myself it was easier to nod, easier to smile, easier to tell myself this was love shaping itself into routine. Still, silence began to stretch between us. At dinners, I spoke less, listening instead to his voice filling the space. His hand rested on mine, but it felt like possession rather than tenderness. One night, as we walked along the shoreline, the moon casting silver light across the water, I dared to say, "Daniel, sometimes I feel like you don't hear me." He stopped, turned slowly, and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. His eyes locked on, mine too steady, too unyielding. "Of course I hear you," he whispered, though his grip tightened slightly on my arm. "But I know what's best for us. Don't you trust me?" The question lingered long after he released me. Later, lying beside him in the dark, I stared at the ceiling fan turning above us, its blades whirring in a steady rhythm. His breathing was even, content, while mine caught in shallow bursts. Told myself it was stress. That marriage was an adjustment. But deep down, I already feared silence was becoming the loudest part of us. The ceiling fan hummed above me, its blade slicing the heavy air into uneven whispers. I had almost drifted into sleep when a faint vibration stirred me awake. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but then I noticed the glow, a sliver of blue light spilling from the corner of the room. Daniel wasn't beside me. I pushed myself up, heart tapping against my ribs, and followed the sound. He stood, near the balcony door, phone pressed tightly to his ear, his back turned to me. The glass reflected his outline, sharp and tense, a shadow inside a shadow. Yes. No, I told you, he hissed, his voice low, urgent. She can't find out. I froze. The words pricked my skin like ice. My first thought was absurdly innocent. Maybe he was planning a surprise. A gift? A secret excursion? Something sweet for our honeymoon? But the tone didn't match the fantasy. His shoulders were too rigid. His hand clutched the phone like it might break. I shifted my weight and the floor creaked. He turned instantly. Claire? His face softened, but only after a beat too long. Couldn't sleep? I heard you, talking, I whispered, forcing a smile. Everything okay? He slipped the phone into his pocket. Work call, just nonsense from back home. Go back to bed. Work. Always work. But hadn't he promised to leave all that behind for this trip? I crawled under the sheets, pretending to settle, though my pulse raced. A few minutes later he joined me, pulling me close. His breath warmed my ear as he murmured, "You worry too much." But I couldn't stop replaying the phrase, "She can't find out." Find out what? About him, about me, about us. I stared into the darkness long after he slept, every tick of the clock sharpening my unease. The silence between us no longer felt like routine. It felt like a curtain drawn to hide something I wasn't meant to see. And for the first time I wondered, had I married a stranger? By morning I convinced myself the call had been nothing. A strange hour, a wrong number, maybe a work detail after all. But the unease clung to me like smoke. When I finally asked Daniel, his reaction made the room colder than the question ever could. "You're imagining things, Claire," he said, voice clipped as he set down his coffee. I was barely on the phone. "Why are you always listening for something that isn't there?" "I'm not imagining," I whispered. "I heard you. She can't find out. Those were your words." He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "This is what you do, twist things. Hear half a story and make it into a monster. You know how paranoid you sound right now?" The words hit harder than they should have. My throat tightened. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe the stress of the honeymoon, the sudden closeness, the newness of marriage, it could all play tricks. But then that phrase again, "she can't find out." Later, when I met my best friend Lila for coffee in town, the weight spilled out of me in half sentences. She listened, her brows knit and quiet. "Alarm. Claire," she said carefully. "Love isn't supposed to make you question your sanity. It's not supposed to feel like walking on eggshells." I stared at the swirl of my untouched latte. "He makes me feel like I'm crazy, like I can't even trust my own ears." "That's the point," she said, leaning closer. "That's gaslighting. Don't brush it off. Please." Her words landed heavy, not because I fully believed them, but because they echoed the fear I had buried. I wanted so desperately to trust him, to believe in the vows we had exchanged. Yet here was Lila, putting into words the storm I had been trying to silence. That night, when I returned home, Daniel greeted me with a smile too polished, his arms sliding around my waist like nothing had happened. For anyone watching, we were perfect. But inside, something was shifting, because no matter how many times he told me I was imagining things, the dread whispered otherwise. What if I wasn't? It happened on a night too quiet, when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Daniel and I had just settled into bed when a sharp knock rattled through the silence. My body tensed instantly. "Midnight visitors rarely bring good news," Daniel muttered, irritated, and went downstairs. I followed, each creak of the steps echoing louder than the last. When he opened the door, a man stood beneath the porch light. His face was rough, eyes shadowed with something that felt like recognition. He looked directly at Daniel. "You thought I'd forget?" the man growled. "You thought what you did would just disappear?" My heart lurched. "Daniel, what is he talking about?" Daniel's jaw clenched, but his voice was smooth too. Smooth. "Ignore him, Claire, some drunk looking for trouble." But the man's words pierced through me like knives. "She doesn't know, does she? She doesn't know who you really are." Daniel shoved the door shut so hard the glass rattled. He turned to me, smile forced. Scammer, happens all the time. People trying to shake you down with stories. Don't give it a second thought. But I couldn't stop. The man's eyes had burned with certainty, not desperation. And the way he said she doesn't know, like a truth waiting to explode. Later, lying in bed, I could hear Daniel's breathing, steady and calm, as though nothing had happened. My own chest, however, rose and fell too quickly. I replayed the knock, the stranger's face, the venom in his voice. If it was a scam, why did Daniel's hands tremble after he closed the door? Why did his smile look pasted on, thin and cracking? At the edges? I rolled away from him in the dark, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. For the first time, the thought crept in uninvited and refused to leave. What if the stranger wasn't lying? And what if I was the one sleeping beside the lie? The midnight knock refused to leave my mind. Days later, I tried distracting myself. With chores, dusting, folding laundry, tucking away winter coats. Yet unease clung to me like static. That was when I decided to clean under the bed, a task I usually avoided. My hand brushed against something hard, metal, cold and deliberate. I pulled it into the light, a small black box, its edges worn but its lock unbroken. It didn't belong to me. For a long moment I just stared, my pulse racing. Then, against the thunder of my own heartbeat, I tried the lock. It wouldn't budge. But the box had weight, secrets heavy enough to make my palms sweat. Later, when Daniel stepped out to run errands, I couldn't resist any longer. With trembling fingers, I fetched a thin hairpin and jiggled at the lock until it gave way. With a faint click, my breath caught. Inside were photographs, grainy images of a woman I didn't recognize, her smile caught mid-laughter. Beneath them lay newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. The headline sent ice through my veins. Local woman found dead in woods, no arrests made. Unsolved murder leaves town in fear. My stomach turned. The woman in the photographs, was she the victim? And why were these kept hidden? Beneath our bed. I shoved everything back in, re-locked the box and slid it to its hiding place before Daniel returned. When he walked in minutes later carrying groceries and humming casually, I forced a smile. But inside, I was shaking. At dinner, I watched him. Every laugh, every glance, every gentle touch now felt rehearsed, staged for my benefit. His hands moved smoothly across the table, yet all I could picture were those headlines. That night, lying beside him, the weight of the box pressed down harder than his arm around me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the stranger's warning echoed louder. She doesn't know who you married, now I did. At least part of it, and I feared the rest, because secrets that dark don't stay buried forever. The box stayed in my mind like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Every time Daniel smiled, I saw the headlines instead. My silence weighed heavier by the day until it finally cracked. It happened one evening over dinner. I asked, casually at first, about the woman in the photos. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. For a second, his face went blank. Then came the laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Old friends," he said. "You're overthinking again." But I pressed. Something inside me needed to know. The tension swelled, his voice sharpening as mine trembled. The air thickened, words overlapping, neither of us backing down. Then, without warning, his hand shot out, fast, brutal. The slap echoed louder than my own gasp. My cheek burned, my ears rang, and the world seemed to tilt. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed us both. He stared at me, wide-eyed, as though he couldn't believe what he had done. And then came the flood. Apologies tumbling from his mouth, his hands reaching for mine. I'm sorry, it was a mistake. I swear it will never happen." Again. He pulled me into his arms, cradling me like something fragile, pressing frantic kisses into my hair. He wept, whether from shame or fear of losing control, I couldn't tell. The next day, he was sweetness itself. Flowers appeared on the table, my favorite breakfast waiting when I woke. He touched me gently, reverently, as though worshipping the ground I walked on. To anyone else, it would have looked like love. But when I caught my reflection, The faint bruise on my cheek whispered the truth. Love shouldn't leave marks. Still, I told no one, not even my friend. I convinced myself it was a single mistake, born from stress. Yet in the silence of night, lying in his arms, I felt the weight of something irreversible. Because once the first blow lands, never truly ends there. The bruise bloomed purple against my cheek, a fading echo of his rage. I powdered it over, telling myself no one would notice. But walls are thinner than we believe, and neighbors have ears sharper than secrets allow. Mrs. Green from across the street was the first. Her eyes lingered too long when she handed me back the borrowed dish. "Rough week?" she asked, her voice layered with concern. I smiled, mechanical, and muttered something about clumsiness. But her gaze didn't soften. Then came the stares. The lingering looks as I collected the mail, the whispered exchanges I caught from open windows. I was no longer just the new wife on the block. I was the subject of speculation, pity, fear. One evening I noticed a car parked across from our house. Engine off, lights dimmed. The same car returned the next day and the next. Finally, a knock at the door. Detective Harris. His badge gleamed under the porch light, his eyes calm but piercing. "There's been a report," he said. Neighbors heard shouting. Someone mentioned bruises. My heart rattled in my chest. Daniel hovered behind me, his arm slipping, around my waist in a performance so rehearsed it felt grotesque. He smiled for the detective, his voice honeyed. "We argue sometimes, like every couple, don't we, sweetheart?" I nodded, my throat tight, my words swallowed. To contradict him here felt dangerous, an invitation to punishment once the door closed. Yet to stay silent was its own betrayal, a denial of the truth etched into my skin. The detective's eyes lingered on me longer than comfort allowed, searching for an opening I couldn't give. "If you ever need help," he said softly, "my card's here." He slipped it into my hand like a secret. That night, Daniel's touch was suffocating, his whispered assurances venom dressed as devotion. "They'll never believe you," he murmured. "Not against me." I hid the detective's card under my pillow, the paper burning against my skin. A choice waited, looming, unshakable. Keep protecting him, or finally protect myself. And choices I knew could be deadly. The detective's card still burned in my mind, tucked beneath my pillow like a lifeline. But Daniel must have sensed it, the distance in my eyes, the hesitation in my voice. His smiles grew thinner, his grip tighter. And then came the night everything fractured. It started over something small. Dinner was late. He slammed the plate down, glass shattering across the counter. Words erupted like gunfire. His accusations, my trembling denials. The storm built until it was no longer about food but control, about dominance, about silence. I remember the sound before the pain, the sharp crack of skin against skin, the metallic crash of my body against the kitchen island. My breath caught as I reached for the counter, but the knife block tipped, scattering blades across the floor. In the chaos, one sliced across my palm, red spilling onto the tiles in violent blossoms. The sight froze him. For a moment, Daniel's fury cracked, replaced by panic. "Look what you made me do," he hissed, as though the blood was my fault, not his rage. I staggered back, clutching my hand, adrenaline urging me toward the door. My fingers brushed the handle, freedom inches away when his body blocked the path. His voice was low, measured, dangerous. "You walk out there, no one will believe you. You'll be the hysterical wife with a temper. I'll be the man everyone respects. Is that what you want? To humiliate yourself?" Tears blurred my vision, the metallic scent of blood filling my lungs. My chest heaved, caught between the door and his shadow, between escape and the prison of his arms. Then he softened, shifting gears with practiced ease. He pressed a towel into my hand, kissed my forehead with chilling tenderness. "Stay. We'll fix this. We're stronger together." I wanted to scream, to run, to claw my way free. But my body betrayed me, frozen by fear and the echo of every time he promised it would never happen again. That night, as I scrubbed blood from the floor, I realized the truth. I wasn't just living with a liar. I was sleeping beside a killer. The storm came without warning, thunder rolling like a warning drum. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my bandaged hand throbbing. Daniel paced the hall, restless, his footsteps heavy, uneven, like a predator caged too long. The argument sparked quickly, as they always did. This time it wasn't over dinner or money. It was over silence, my refusal to answer his questions, my distant gaze. His voice rose, violent against the storm outside. I screamed back, louder than I ever had before. The walls carried everything. My cries, the crash of something breaking, the sharp thud of bodies colliding. Neighbors stirred, and then silence, followed by one last piercing scream. Miles away, my friend Claire bolted upright in bed. She knew that sound, raw and desperate. She grabbed her coat, the rain lashing her face as she drove through the storm, heart pounding. By the time she reached our door, the house was dark, too quiet. Daniel answered, hair damp, shirt clinging to his chest. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "She's gone," he said simply. Packed a bag, said. She couldn't take it anymore. Claire's eyes darted past him, searching the dimly lit rooms. "Where is she, Daniel?" "She left," he repeated, his voice flat, final. "Ask anyone. You know how unstable she's been. This is what she does. Runs." But Claire didn't believe him. Neither did Detective Harris, who arrived hours later, called by another neighbor who had heard the screams. The detective's sharp eyes took in the spotless counters, the freshly mopped floor, the faint scent of bleach clinging to the air. "Funny," Harris said quietly. "How clean this kitchen looks after such a storm." Daniel's jaw tightened, his practiced charm flickering at the edges. The storm outside raged on, but inside the real storm had just begun. Because if she had run, there should have been footprints in the mud. There should have been a goodbye. But there was nothing, only silence, and a husband with too many answers. Rehearsed. The storm outside had calmed, but the storm within the town was only just beginning. Detective Harris returned to the house with a warrant, his instincts refusing to quiet. The husband tried to appear calm, offering coffee and a hollow smile, but his hands betrayed him, trembling, stained faintly with something darker than worry. Search of the bedroom revealed what the neighbors had whispered about for months. Locked drawers, false compartments, and a shoebox shoved deep beneath the bed. Inside, wrapped in old scarves, were her journals, dozens of them, their spines worn, pages heavy with ink and desperation. Each entry was a testimony. He said it was love, but love shouldn't leave bruises. "If something happens to... please know it wasn't an accident." The words echoed in the detective's mind like a voice from beyond, guiding him through the labyrinth of lies the husband had built. The journals painted a chilling portrait. Years of manipulation, of a man who smiled in public but raged in private, of a woman trapped between fear and hope. They spoke of neighbors' suspicions, of nights she pretended to sleep while he paced with clenched fists, of the moments she thought escape was near but never found the courage. Evidence mounted swiftly. Financial records showed double lives. Hidden. Accounts, late-night hotel bills, a trail of betrayal that stretched further than anyone imagined. Friends came forward, voices trembling, admitting they had seen bruises but believed her excuses. Now those excuses formed a chain of truth, tightening around the man who had hidden behind charm and deceit. When confronted, his mask shattered. Rage erupted, but this time it was contained by steel cuffs and the watchful eyes of officers. The image of a grieving husband dissolved, replaced by the chilling reality of a predator who had shared a bed with his victim while planning his next lie. Justice, though delayed, arrived. Yet the haunting truth lingered, etched in every journal, page and every whispered memory. She had been sleeping beside a killer all along, and though the case closed, the town would never sleep as soundly again.